When Resident Evil opens its doors in 1996 and invited players to explore its mansion and get scared by the zombies that roam within it, it completely changed video games. Its impact and effect on the gaming industry is undeniable, and it's largely the reason why horror games are as popular as they are today. But survival horror didn't start here, no, far from it. For that, we gotta go way back, and let's do that. Let's see how we got from this to this. So sit back and relax, and let's go through survival horror from 1973 to 1996, one game at a time. And let's learn about how the games were made, what they play like, and maybe even a little about the men and women that made them.
Hey, I'm Randolph. I'm a part-time adventurer, full-time dumbass, and this is my history of survival horror.
Gregory Yope was born on the 18th of June 1945 in Eugene, Oregon. Not much is known about Yope's life before and after he would go on to make a very influential game, but at some point he graduated high school and left for college to go study engineering at Dartmouth University in Massachusetts. It was during his schooling that he in 1973 would see logic games played on a mainframe computer. These games were made by amateur programmers in their spare time, and most of them were made as learning exercises. So the games were very simple, and only a handful of them were distributed commercially via mail order. Most of them were so-called hide-and-seek games, text-based adventures that put the player inside a world that consisted of a 10x10 grid and taught them to find something or multiple somethings. Gameplay was turn-based in a way, and the games recorded each command typed by the player, and the goal was to retrieve the objects needed for completion in as few moves as possible. Yope rightly recognized that this wasn't fun, this was just a memory exercise, and he found himself growing tired of each game very quickly, because once he had figured out the solution, well, there was no reason to keep on playing.
And due to the shareware nature of how these games were coded, and the nature of these games were mostly being learning exercises, they were essentially the same 10x10 grid-based hide-and-seek game.
One day, while Yope was browsing the programming magazine People's Computer Company looking for new games to play, he realized this, and frustrated with the stagnant state of the available library, he decided to do something about it. He came up with a name later that afternoon, Hunt the Wumpus, and then he set about fixing the hide-and-seek genre's two biggest problems. First was the level design. The 10x10 grid was boring and predictable, and Yope, he didn't like it. He had at one point made a kite in the shape of a dodecahedron, and he decided to use that as a pattern for the connected caves the game would take place in. Each cave was given a number, and when the player started the game or they moved, they would be told what number cave they were in and what caves they were connected to. And the second issue Yope addressed was the object that the player needed to find. Yope changed it from an object to a monster, and he gave the monster the ability to roam around in the caves like the player. And he also gave the player the ability to fight it. But probably most impressively, Yope crafted a story that explained the text-based limitations of the game. See, the monster called the Wumpus reacted strongly to light, so the player could not shine a light in the cave, or else they would be killed by the very fast creature. And so, they had to creep around in total darkness, trying to navigate their way through via smell and sound, and that was what the text prompts would be in the game, descriptions of what the player was smelling and sensing, and they would tell the player what cave they were in, what caves were near them, and if there were any dangers in the adjacent caves, like bottomless pits, so-called superbats, or even the titular Wumpus itself, all via appropriate descriptions like a feeling of a draft indicating a pit, or a foul smell hinting that the Wumpus was near. In the game, the player is armed with a magical bow that can shoot crooked arrows, which can travel around corners and from cave to cave. The player has to fire an arrow and then select up to 5 chambers that the arrow will travel through, and since the game is turn-based, the arrow will travel 1 cave per turn, and so will the player and the Wumpus. If the arrow hits the player, the game is over, and if it hits nothing, the Wumpus will get scared and move, and if it hits the Wumpus, then the game is won. And with those innovations to the hide-and-seek genre, and with the release of Hunt the Wumpus, Gregory Yope had inadvertently created the survival horror genre, as the game featured both a monster that chases the player, an open-ended area to navigate,
and it requires the player to manage their inventory. And all of that is essentially what survival horror is at its very basic core.
Joop submitted the game to People's Computer Company magazine, and while attending a conference at Stanford University about a month later, he was surprised to see that in a section of the conference where computer terminals were set up, people were enthusiastically playing his game. Realizing that he had a bit of a hit on his hand, Joop announced in People's Computer Company magazine that Hunt the Wumpus would be available as a mail-order game, and following the release and sale of the first one, he made 2 follow-ups, one changing the cave system layout and another one adding additional hazards. The game would go on to be ported to several other programming languages,
and eventually it would receive a port complete with graphics, which is the one you're seeing on screen now.
Hunt the Wumpus was for its time a massive hit, and its influence cannot be understated. And unlike every other game from the 70s that isn't Space Invaders, it's not forgotten, as the titular Wumpus has appeared as a Magic the Gathering card, and the game itself in novels and even inside other games. And most impressively, in 2012 it was inducted into Time magazine's prestigious 100 all-time greatest video games, alongside cultural juggernauts like Pong and Super Mario, and it's what it deserves. Gregory Joop would end his career in video games with the 3rd Wumpus game, and after graduating college he would go on to have a long and successful career as an engineer. First conceptualizing an unrealized concept for a house that would react to the emotional states of its inhabitants, much like what Google and Amazon are trying to do with their smart home devices today, before he would land a job as an engineer working for a radio broadcast company. Sadly, in 2008, aged just 60, Gregory Joop would fall into a diabetic coma, and 5 days later, he would leave this plane of existence. But maybe not forever. Joop was airlifted to a hospice in Arizona, and here technicians from the Alcor Life Extension Foundation stood by, and when he died later that evening, they moved him into their facility and began a neuropreservation procedure, a so-called cryogenic suspension. See, Joop had struggled with mental health issues all his life, according to his longtime girlfriend Andrea Vanderloo, and he had attempted to fix himself for decades with different treatments. When no conventional or unconventional treatments had done the job, he came to the conclusion that no such treatment had been invented yet, which is why he wished to be cryogenically suspended, so that he could one day wake up in a future where he and Andrea could be together, free of the mental issues that had kept them from truly enjoying each other's company.
And for Gregory's sake, I hope that's true thing one day.
It was our dream to be reunited in the future, when both of us could be psychologically and physically restored and even enhanced for the fulfillment and enjoyment of our love for each other. His aspirations, however, went far beyond that. In his spirit, he saw himself as a guardian of the earth. He was extremely motivated to contribute in the future to humanity achieving world peace. For his personal satisfaction, he imagined having multiple manifestations of himself, with at least one of him going off exploring the stars. He would joke about all of his many selves meeting at the Hard Rock Cafe, at the end of time. See you in the future, love of my life. Andrea.
Next time, we'll follow the rise and fall of a small company that built upon the formula that Wumpus established, and then brought horror into the 3rd dimension, even though it was a little hard for its users to understand.
Look into your monitor as though you were looking down a hallway.
And we'll see how they used that 3rd perspective to spook, intrigue, and even drive gamers completely mad.
Had it. I'm sick of it. I hate it. Well, maybe I'll try Death Maze just one more time.
It's all next time on my history.